Today, I'm speaking to David Satter, journalist and historian with unique insights into how the repression of the past is having terrible consequences for present-day Russia and, of course, for Ukraine as well. David's written extensively about Russia and the Soviet Union, especially the decline and fall of the USSR and the rise of post-Soviet Russia. He was the first American journalist to be expelled from Russia since the Cold War in December 2013. He's written for numerous publications, including the Financial Times and others, and he has perhaps some of the best titled books in the whole category. I think along with Peter Pomerantsev, who gives you a run for your money, but books such as It Was a Long Time Ago and It Never Happened Anyway, Darkness at Dawn, The Rise of the Russian Criminal State, and my personal favourite, The Less You Know, The Better You Sleep. Well, David, hopefully we're going to help people sleep a little bit less well by increasing their knowledge of Russia and its toxicity.
Well, I hope so. I hope so.
I
Russia's
mean,
a dangerous country and we should be aware of it.
absolutely, and never more dangerous than now. Before we hit record, we were talking about some of the dangers of their, let's say, mastery of drone warfare, which I think NATO is way behind the curve on. But we'll come to that one in just a minute. Let's talk a little bit about the US and the trajectory it's on, and how that has been enshrined in, say, the national security policy, which has, to put it mildly, some concerning features.
Well, definitely, because it's the way in which we frame the conflict uh, that is critical to deciding its outcome. We have to understand why we're fighting, what our values are, what is at stake. Um, It's interesting. Some time ago, I read a book by Harold Nicholson called Why We Fight, which was put out in the 1930s to explain why Britain was going to fight Hitler. And it was interesting because it showed the error that the West tends to make when dealing with these kind of nihilistic dictators. It, uh, it spoke almost exclusively about Hitler's inability to and unwillingness to abide by his agreements, his greed, his aggression, but it never explained the spirit of the Hitler regime and why it was so dangerous. Well, we have something similar now. The explanations for what is going on often range from Putin is determined to right historical wrongs to Putin is an aggressor who wants to reconstitute the Soviet Union. But no one imagines, or it's a very rare person who understands that what's at stake here is not some type of concrete objective, but rather, in fact, the personal interest of one man and the people around him, and the fact that they have devalued human beings to such a degree that they're ready to do absolutely anything in the service of their own power. And that devaluation of human life, of human worth, is really what defines the conflict. Uh, it would be the same even if if their objectives were limited, if they were unlimited. The reality is that what has been created in Russia is so nihilistic and so dangerous that in and of itself, it poses a threat to humanity. The idea that human beings have no independent value, but are simply raw material. That is what is at stake. That's what Ukraine is trying to break away from. That's the mentality of Russia under Putin. And it was the mentality under the Soviet Union, under Stalin as well. But the Ukrainians may not put it that way. Uh, but in essence, and against the background of their history, that's what's at stake. it was reflected, I think, perhaps better than any other situation in the decision that was made to subject Ukraine and other regions to a devastating artificial famine in the early 1930s, in which, by some accounts, a total of maybe 10, 11 million people died, 4 or 5 million in Ukraine. Uh, and that decision was a cold, calculated decision uh, to strengthen the communist system, to eliminate opposition, and to secure the regime, regardless of the cost. And the fact that it meant collectivizing agriculture so that the food supply would be under the control of the regime, and that decision would lead to the starvation of millions. That fact uh, that didn't deter anyone. And that's a very specific kind of mentality that's been handed down. That's the mentality, that's the core mentality that's at stake now in the human wave attacks that we're seeing for really objectives that have nothing to do with the welfare of the population or of the good of the country. That was the mentality that was involved in the blowing up of the apartment buildings in 1999 that brought Putin to power. It's important to remember that the people who were killed were chosen at random. Uh, Putin and the people around him, were determined to preserve the Yeltsin era oligarchy's hold on power and to put in place someone who would protect Yeltsin, understood that they had to carry out acts of terror in order to change the psychology of the country and foist a successor on the Russians who they consciously didn't want, someone who would protect Yeltsin. And to that end, it didn't matter. The people were no significance. They weren't enemies. They were chosen at random. Their buildings were blown up by their own government. Uh, so it's that mentality, that core mentality, that is at stake right now, and that's what Americans, what Britons, what people in the West find the hardest thing, which is the hardest thing for them to grasp. As a result, it affects the priorities, and it affects how we conceive of the conflict, and it affects even those who rightly support Ukraine, but didn't do enough when they were in power to prevent this preventable war. Of course, it affects those who are trying to appease Russia, or who have under the influence of Russian propaganda or Russian blackmail, uh, adopted a totally unjustified positive opinion of Russia. Uh, and this is something that has to become known, I think. And because it's so counterintuitive to think of people that way.
It's a very difficult one, isn't it? I mean,
It is to imagine total instrumentalization of people, total reduction of people to units and their usefulness for the accumulation of, and exercise of power. It's the human mind and the Western mind recoil from it, but that's what's at stake. That's
it's
why it's
ironic, isn't it?
important.
Having come through the
Well,
Industrial Revolution, which did perhaps more than anything at that point to instrumentalize human life and labor, it seems that actually what has emerged from our systems industrialization is actually a certain value placed on human resource, which is quite humanizing. Whereas
Well,
I
I
think,
think that, we have to be careful here a little bit. I think my understanding of it is a little bit different. I mean, in the economic sphere, yes, but not totally. Not it didn't deny the existence of a human soul or of a human of human worth. Uh, but within the human beings were treated as or labor was treated as a commodity within the framework of the industrial economic process. But outside of that process, there was no attempt to simply murder people as for no reason.
well, they had an
I
economic
mean, even though the
value at some level. Yeah.
conditions, especially at the beginning of the industrial age, were pretty bad, as we know, although they got better. Um, no, it's a leap from that. And it's the idea. I mean, we can compare it to the understanding of the individual that uh, is enshrined in the American Declaration of Independence. Uh, the idea that we hold these truths to be self-evident. In fact, they're not self-evident. Uh, that all men are created equal and endowed with by their creator with certain inalienable rights. The point here is that the the mentality that was imposed by the Bolsheviks in Russia eliminated that understanding of the human being. Now, of course, uh, people are not created equal in their talents. We know that. That's just undeniable. What the idea was that their ultimate human worth, they have irreducible human worth, and this is anchored in a kind of extra worldly, extra natural, transcendent point of reference. Well, you needed something like that in order to assert that all people have inherent worth. Uh, and once you explicitly deny it, the philosophical uh, conditions are created for treating people as if they're just raw material, which is exactly what happened because the communist ideology was explicitly atheistic. The Soviet Union was the first country in history to be created explicitly on the basis of atheism, and the idea of the inherent worth of the individual was eliminated. And then now, theoretically, when the Soviet Union fell, so we're getting into now a serious philosophical conversation. Nonetheless, it's important because it reflects on what's happening now. When the Soviet Union fell, what was critical was to change that underlying mentality, because with that underlying mentality, you can't build a democratic society. You have to, because you can't establish the rule of law. You can't establish the worth of the individual. That should have been the priority. The values that were created in the Soviet Union, if we kind of go through this briefly, as a result of the Soviet ideology, the same ideology that we were just talking about, were so-called class values. In other words, there was no sense that there's a universal standard of right and wrong. Right is whatever is in the interest of the ruling class. So therefore, morality depends on the historically progressive class being in charge, and then everything that they do is right. And if they decide to create an artificial famine in order to create their version of utopia, and the result is that millions of people starve to death, well, that's right. Because after all, it's in the interest of progress. So, and that was so what had to happen in Russia and what didn't happen is that these class values had to be jettisoned and replaced by the normal universal values that are reflected in the Declaration of Independence and in any kind of law-based society. But what happened in Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union was that the creation of a law-based state, the establishment of an infrastructure which respected ethics and universal values, was completely ignored. And the so-called reformers concentrated on the economic transformation of the society on the same amoral base. So what you got was gangster capitalism. You had got capitalism, but you didn't have law. And that gangster capitalism could only sustain itself ultimately with terror. And the 1999 apartment bombings were the critical turning point because the criminal capitalism that was created, the criminal state that was created by Yeltsin, was confirmed by those bombings and in effect consolidated under Putin. Putin and Yeltsin probably in terms of mentality are actually not that different. But Yeltsin didn't, because of the circumstances under which he came to power and the conditions that existed in the 1990s, did not have the opportunity to show how barbaric he was capable of being. And Putin also didn't in the first years of his rule. Uh, but wise observers should have understood it was a little bit like, the night of the long knives. The Telegraph had a headline in, I think it was 1934. Hitler stamps out mutiny like a gangster. Uh, and no, but Britain quickly forgot about the night of the long knives and embarked on a policy of appeasement. Well, it's a little bit similar here with the apartment bombings. We were all too happy to close our eyes to those bombings and what they meant. And despite overwhelming and incontrovertible evidence that this was a terrorist act carried out against Russia's own people. And the bill eventually had to be paid, but was paid by the Ukrainians.
That's it. And
Uh,
the signs were all there. I mean, you've been pointing them out. A number of other individuals have been pointing it out. I remember hearing Khodorkovsky about a decade ago, shortly after he was released, giving a talk in London, where he was asked, how should we deal with Vladimir Putin? And this is before, obviously, the full-scale war. This is before COVID. Um, and he basically said, you should have no dealings at all. This was in the Guardian building, when they've got a big auditorium in the Guardian offices
mm,
in London, and you could hear the intake of breath. No one wanted to hear that. He basically said, this is a criminal regime, and as you would with terrorists, as you would with, drug mafia, if you deal with them, you simply make them stronger and you legitimize their criminality. He simply said, have no dealings, whether it be political, economic, or diplomatic with them. Cut and sever all ties. Of course, that's not what anyone wanted to hear.
no, I mean, I had similar experiences. Boris Nemtsov and I spoke to a person who was going to be chief advisor to Obama on Russian matters, and we tried to explain this to him. And of course, the result was the reset policy. This was a preventable war. There was no reason for this war to have taken place. Uh, and there were steps that the West could have taken that would have foreclosed this possibility. But they didn't. But it was interesting. Someone showed me not long ago a piece from the New York Times by Madeleine Albright. Well, in 2000, in her testimony before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, when she was asked who blew up the building, she refused to answer. Uh, it was just you know, we pay a high price for our superficiality. And I mean, it was interesting. Tony Blair was saying, made a statement that was just kind of amusing. He was giving the year that he realized that Putin had changed from being peace-loving, pro-Western Putin to being aggressive and a dangerous Putin. What it means with the real year was the year that Tony Blair understood what had been there all along. But in any case, he said, well, this is when Putin changed. He never changed. It was all there. The evidence, and not just the bombings, but the terrorist acts that they inspired, the Nordost theater siege, the Beslan school massacre, uh, and many other things. The 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 murders of Anna Politkovskaya and Alexander Litvinenko, not to mention those who investigated the apartment bombings like Sergei Yushchenkov or Yuri Shekharchikan. So it um so it's very disappointing when we look, you know, after 4 years of war and we understand the heroism of those who've been subjected to Russian aggression and the terrible cost that has been paid, and paid by Russians as well, who, without full knowledge, are being thrown into a meat grinder. It's very disappointing to see the statements being made by American officials and the kind of policy statements that are being made. I'm thinking specifically of Secretary of State Rubio's remarks in Munich and the national security guidelines that were released by the United States, which seem to think that the challenge, the civilizational challenge, is not between in the world is not between democratic countries that respect the rule of law, that are have a Judeo-Christian inheritance, that that stand for the values of the West, and a culture of of murderous and cynical nihilism, but rather the struggle against wokeism, or the struggle against uh, immigration, or whatever the hell else they were saying the struggle is supposed to be against. Uh, in other words, their minds are circumscribed by the resentments that now exist, the populist movements, populist resentments, and indeed the some of the abuses also on the side of those who are 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 foisting uh, a pretty uninformed view of Western society on everybody else. Those are internal conflicts that we have in our societies, in our law-based societies, that have to be worked out. And they will be worked out, hopefully. They don't represent a civilizational challenge.
And
And
do
the
you,
fact that you're mistaking them for a civilizational challenge shows that you don't know what the real challenge is,
or what perhaps the basis of civilization is, because
or what
yeah,
the basis of civilization is. That in fact, you know, just as Madeleine Albright didn't want to hear about the depths of the evil that the West faces, which didn't make it go away, by the way. And just as others, uh, and just as Boris Nemtsov and I were unsuccessful in explaining it, and as I've been unsuccessful in explaining it for so many years, it doesn't mean that it can't be understood. It can be. And it must be, because that will unite the West. That will consolidate the support in the West for Ukraine.
And that's where the
And
difference between Russia and say, foundational Western values are diametrically opposed. That is in the very foundation of the rule of law, the idea that no one is above the law, neither class nor wealth nor status grant you immunity from those laws. That seems to be a lesson that is unfortunately lacking, and one which is very intentionally lacking in the Trump regime, which is the idea that laws are for the little people. And that seems to be the point where you have an intersection with this export of Russian values and some who are either willing to turn a blind eye or who are directly benefiting from, let's say, a suspension of the rule of law. Is that, in your mind, the most dangerous aspect of this transactional relationship which seems to exist between the White House and Russia? It's a direct export of nihilistic, highly venal, let's say, values.
I can only give my impression. I don't know our president personally. I know some people who have worked with him or around him. I know what I read, of course, and what I see. I can give my impression, which is that, uh, like many Americans, uh, he's not intellectually equipped to understand the bedrock of values which makes a civilized life possible. He he carries superficiality to an extreme, but it doesn't mean that it's that much different from the way many other people think.
I was going to say Elon Musk, it
And
seems to me, is prodigiously smart in some areas, but seems to not understand the foundations of the system that allowed him to become rich or his companies to flourish.
it
It's the
has
same
to be,
problem.
if it isn't, that's why we have programs like this to try to explain to people things that might not be so obvious to them. Because it's so much, because respect for human life and the rule of law are so much a part of life in the West, it's easy to take them for granted and to quickly forget that economic conflicts, political arguments, cultural disagreements, all take place within that context in a civilized society, and that context is more important than the arguments themselves. The arguments can go one way or the other, but as long but when extremism, violence, corruption become really dangerous is when they threaten the foundations. And when people always just have an automatic tendency to assume, to attribute global significance to whatever it is they don't like or whatever it is they're trying to accomplish, because most people don't think philosophically. It's true. Uh, And most people know nothing about Russia. And if they knew the details, they would see the nihilism and they would see how it differs. And you can bet there's not a single person in the Trump administration who has that kind of knowledge. I mean, J.D. Vance, the vice president, was said that it didn't matter to him at one point. He said, anyway, I don't know if he still holds this view, who wins, Russia or Ukraine. That now there may be many things that he does know, but at least on this issue, that reflects profound ignorance. Did he know, for example, about the shooting down of the Malaysian MH17 airliner? By the way, that was deliberate. The Russian disinformation tried to make it look as if it was done by rebels, separatist rebels, who in any case would be under their control. but that's not what the evidence shows. But we never get into the evidence
No,
is the problem, or
Gherkin
very
is
few.
hardly just a rebel. He's very much an offshoot or adjacent to the,
Gherkin, yeah,
Siloviki.
Gherkin was, and Gherkin is, well, by the way, is he has outbreaks. If we're talking about Igor Gherkin, otherwise known as Strelkov, the I believe he was defense minister of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic. Uh, he's an interesting character for all the bad things he's done. He has outbreaks of honesty in which
Which proves
he
fatal,
actually
as
is,
Prigozhin showed as well.
yeah, he's capable of telling the truth. And he told the truth about the MH17 destruction of a Western passenger airline with 298 people aboard. And he said that he and the rebels had nothing to do with it. And that's what the evidence shows. It was a deliberate destruction of a civilian airliner by by the Russians and carried out and planned by them. Now, how does that? That's of course in the spirit of the apartment bombings, but how does that square with the idea that that Putin should be appointed to this Council of Peace for the Middle East? I think not
The
council.
Board
What's
of
the
Peace,
board of
which
peace? I'm sorry, a board of
Tony Blair
peace.
has disgraced himself yet again by actually appearing on it or associating himself with it. So
Well,
it's,
I mean, but
yeah,
why would you could invite Tony Blair? I mean, but he hasn't committed any terrorist acts. I mean, unless we say that his ignorance borders on terrorism, which is, I think, it would be a bit of an exaggeration. But but Putin, uh, no,
Lukashenko. I mean, there are numerous terroristic figures. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, the thing is that once we know what's at stake, then we'll know what to do. Um, the all of Russian propaganda and propaganda, by the way, aimed at so-called Russia specialists, is intended to muddy the waters to such a degree that we won't know what's at stake. Um, even those who support Ukraine, who understand the practical consequences, who realize that this is important, uh, you don't know the full depth of what's at stake here. It's as in the 30s in Britain, they Harold Nicholson wrote about the seizure of Czechoslovakia. It was very important. He didn't talk about the fact that they were already gassing children in Germany who had birth defects and were had mentally ill children, or you know where, and that fact. And he also glossed over the anti-Semitism and made a few remarks that suggested he was anti-Semitic himself. But but that was the deeper reason. And oddly, even without it being expressed, people understood it. And I think that to a certain extent, without it being expressed now, there are those who understand. But it's something that could be critical, I think, first of all, in eliminating the notion that Putin is some type of a defender of traditional values. And that we could say, well, that's too stupid for words. Actually, it had the effect of delaying vital assistance to Ukraine for 8 months.
exactly,
That's
and
that's
more. Yeah,
sentiment.
absolutely. And
Well,
even
I
now,
think eight
some are
after
still,
it did it,
yeah,
but would have the effect of consolidating American society sufficiently, and Western society, and Britain is absolutely critical in all this.
that's
Uh,
it. I mean, two friends of mine,
to
Stephen
to
Moore and Joseph Lindsley, have worked very hard to try to counter that argument in evangelical and Republican circles with some degree of success, but it's several years of
well, you need
intense work
you can't
to
just
yeah.
counter it. You have to, you can tell people, but you have to show them.
Yes, well, they've done it through
Eh,
film. I mean, this is very intelligent, and they've made films. They've interviewed people who were actually tortured to try. As you say, you can't just write it in a thesis or a document. No one's going to read it. You have to show it in a format which is a more
Well,
populist format. Humane format.
that's
Yeah.
all fine there, but they'll say, well, there are atrocities in any war. They'll say, but you have to. There's a difference between showing the atrocities and getting at the underlying philosophical difference. To show that, you have to show uh, there are certain incidents that have taken place that will show it and that need to. Well, the cold-blooded shooting down for no reason of the Malaysian airliner is one of them. This is a different level. The blowing up of bombing your own people to come to power, including people who are potentially your own supporters. That's why uh, we say, well, who wants to think at that kind of philosophical level? Who would have wanted to think, in the 1930s about the gassing of the handicapped children in Germany? See, it was all, you see what I mean, Jonathan? The difference between saying that Hitler's an aggressor because he seized Czechoslovakia, or he violated the Munich Agreement, or you can't trust him, which of course you can, and the fact that that he's the head of a regime that would that would gas, and there were 200,000 German children and mentally ill adults who were gassed. The gas, the portable gas chambers, the trucks, that was developed to not to murder Jews or other racial undesirables, but people who were German, the Germans who were not fit to live, as they life that was not worthy of life. Well, when you understand that, then you understand that, listen, there is no way that we can allow this, uh, something that evil to prevail.
And Putin,
So,
similarly. I mean, Nizorov, who I was in two minds about speaking to, but in the end, I went ahead and did an interview with Alexander Nizorov. And I think it was worth it because he described this mentality in a way which few others get close to. He described how Putin and his elite view the population as bydlo or cattle. And his point was, well, if they treat their own as cattle, as expendable, well, how do you think they're going to treat you?
well, of
Not with
course,
greater
and this is
humanity.
yeah,
Yeah.
and this is exactly how he's exactly right. I mean, the try to try to picture the frame of mind. Uh, there were some notes from one of the Nazi extermination camps during the war, in which, in bureaucratic prose, one of the one of the directors of the camp was talking about the units that were processed. And it's only if you begin to read it and begin to see it that he was talking about human beings. Well, that processing units, that's the approach that's being taken to the Russian soldiers and the Ukrainians who are fighting now by the people in charge. You want them in charge of Europe too? Uh, and this awareness can make it, which a lot of people have actually, and Nevzorov would have had it, uh, and which Russians who are conscious and aware have a very difficult time explaining to Westerners is at the core of what we're dealing with right now. And it can make a difference. And it actually can make a difference actually with Russian public opinion too, under the right circumstances. Because not all of not, Russian public opinion is very volatile. And under the right circumstances, they can understand they can made be made aware that this nationalist propaganda is a cover for using them as you say, bidla.
And if he starts treating the so-called elites in the same fashion, there's evidence that he's starting to do that, the governors and so on, that he's placed in the hierarchy, then, not just the mass of the population, of which I think it's dubious as to whether they rise up, but if he starts consuming the vertical itself, I know Stalinism suggests that's not a given that they rise up either, but he's starting to eat the vertical from the inside out. And it's a dangerous process for him. Maybe it's necessary for him to continue the war he's obsessed with, but it's also a dangerous process when he starts to turn on his own.
Oh, he on he he will stop the war the moment continuing it becomes more of a threat to him than stopping it, but not before.
And we
Uh,
haven't
but
ensured
we
that
have not
happens. No.
created those conditions. We have not created those conditions. But we we could. We're terribly handicapped in the West by the leadership of America at the present time.
Hey,
And it's as an American, I mean, just to see, when I read, for example, Marco Rubio's speech, and it's obvious to me that it was written by, just by congressional staff or people, the equivalent of congressional staff. Now they're speechwriters in the State Department, I assume, with each one putting in some facts here, some there, fighting with each other over whose words would be used, comes out kind of completely undistinguished mess. Uh, and this is not and reads like a campaign document. And this is not a trivial document, but a statement of American policy to our allies. Uh, in the it's interesting that in the 19th century, when Britain had its empire, uh, official statements, even some that never saw the light of day, were written with lapidary prose, and at least it used to be in Britain. I don't know. I hope it's not going that our influence isn't having too much of a negative effect. That that it was important to speak and write with the King's English, and now uh, even that mediocre standard that we used to have in the U.S. has been compromised, uh, and that too is important if you're waging war, because war is a test of will. It's the ability to inspire, the ability to express and describe, and to make clear to people who may have to risk their lives and will certainly have to sacrifice economically what it is that's at stake. And that's something I don't know how we can recover it, what can be done. Those of us who work who are in the media or who are writing, uh, you have to do what we can to influence public opinion. That's right now the only factor in America that can defend Ukraine uh, and move uh, the administration toward some sort of uh, decent policy in this area.
And then there's the clarity of thought, there's the logic that underpins it, informed by historical context. I fear that much of that is missing from the media, even if the language reaches a certain bar, and I'm not convinced that much
It's
of the
missing,
language does anyway,
Jonathan, you'd be amazed. People, well, maybe you wouldn't. I think you would not be amazed, come to
I'm
think
not
of it.
amazed at all, alas.
I now take that back, having now thought about it. But I think that people have an instinctive understanding once if they recognize the truth once it's put to them. They really do. And this is true of Americans. It's true even of Trump supporters, many of them, who are in that camp because of the abuses of the wokish side, which divided society and did a lot of things to alienate millions of people who otherwise would have been inclined to defer to those who have more education. Now they don't defer because they've lost all faith in those people. So, but it can be restored.
The last
But
question, yeah.
it has to be a kind of different kind of arguments.
I mean, the last question, which I'll probably pop to the front of the conversation, and you've alluded there to Marco Rubio. I think specifically him over and above people like Vance and especially Wyckoff, who is quite frankly, unaware of almost anything that seems to go on around him. But he's not come from that million. He's come from sort of the shady area of Manhattan real estate. Rubio should know better, and if we take his past statements, he seems at some point in the past to have understood who the enemy is, and he seems to have had some inkling of understanding about how you deal with an enemy such as Russia. So it becomes particularly perverse, and the individual would have suppressed that own knowledge he seemed to have at some point for his own, whatever it is, prestige or position. But if you look at the national security policy and the Munich Security Conference speeches of last year and even this year, is it fair to ask the question, does America, in policy terms, actually know who the enemy is?
Well, I mean, to skip over the question of Rubio personally, because I just it's hard to know what's going on in his mind, what he's thinking, and to draw conclusions about that. But for whatever reason, the uh, the uh, the American administration does not know who the most important enemy is, and they don't know the damage uh, that enemy can do. Uh, and this is the only conclusion that can be drawn from their policies, which suggest that they feel that Russia is a potential ally, either and business partner, and support against China, uh, and uh, and potentially someone with whom it will be possible to have a relationship. Well, that's not so far from the reset policy, but the reset policy took place before the invasion of Ukraine, before the atrocities, before the mass killing, and
So that was
yeah,
misguided. This is doubly misguided.
this is dangerous. It's dangerous, and if it's dangerous because it can encourage it in it will take very little for Russia to break Western solidarity under these conditions. There are many vulnerable places where Russia can test NATO. And if we're not willing to support fully Ukraine with our resources, are we going to confront an army that is willing to sacrifice thousands with our own troops. Uh, I I think that weapons don't matter if you're not ready to use them, and if the adversary is not convinced that you're ready to use them. And we're creating a situation step by step in which we're persuading our adversaries that we're not willing to use them, thereby making a situation in which we have to use them more likely. And we have been tested, we will be tested, and if Russia prevails in Ukraine, of course, the next step will be to break NATO, break and leave the countries of Europe subject to Russian domination. The the reality is that the default position for Russian culture, for Russian history, is aggression and domination of the West. There was a writer wrote, Russia's goal is to dominate the neighboring states and terrify the rest. Well, that was written 200 years ago by the Marquis de Custine
Someone I
in
quote
Russia
with,
in
I quote in almost
1830.
every episode. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So, but that's the default position. But the reason why Putin and his group chose that position was because and chose to fall back on that was because their power was threatened. And now that they've done so, it's going to be very difficult for them to reverse uh, unless they have a very strong incentive to do so.
David, thank you so much for coming on. These issues absolutely need to be understood by our Western policymakers and politicians. I fear they are not fully internalized or understood. We've been trying to do this for 4 years now to try to explain these things to people, and the fight to do that goes on. If we want to retain something that we would consider our civilizational values. And I'm so glad that you are still in this fight with your unique insight and knowledge of this.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. I'm glad to be with you.